Welcome to this edition of the Press Police. Joining us is our Officer-in-Chief, Ryan Williams, master's graduate from New York University in the Journalism School, and our Ombudsman of all media. Ryan, how's it going out there in Oregon?
Going great, thank you.
Well, today our first topic will be the remarkable fall of Helen Thomas, the longtime White House press corps member. She made a comment that was so out of bounds that the Obama administration distanced themselves from it.
Those remarks were offensive and reprehensible. I think she should and has apologized because obviously those remarks do not reflect certainly the opinion of, I assume, most of the people in here.
Well, he assumes it doesn't reflect the opinion of most of the people in the press briefing room. Do you agree with that assertion, Ryan?
Yeah. Just to give our listeners a heads up, what she said was that the Israelis should get the hell out of Palestine and go back to Germany and Poland. And I would say that, her views are the exception and not the rule for the media. They're the extreme. So she's not indicative of reporters generally. But I will say that liberals in the media aren't probably too ideologically different from liberals outside the media. And what I mean by that is, and this is going to be a recurrent theme for a lot of my critiques on the media, is that most journalists, there is a groupthink mentality. And what I mean by that is most journalists are educated in the same places. They're educated by left-wing, ideologically left-wing professors who have an anti-Israeli bias. You and I both went to NYU. And we can attest very well that each year there's a one-week boycott of Israel, calling for, boycott of Israeli goods and whatnot. And
so,
charities.
Ryan, you believe that there is a general persona of what makes a journalist, and that involves a certain ideology politically?
Well, so in my opinion, I've worked in a newsroom for a summer last year, and there's no, conspiracy to make Israel look bad. But what I can say is most journalists suffer from groupthink, and most of them are educated by the same professors. Most of them have the same worldview, and that worldview is that Israel is the aggressor nation, and the Palestinians are, the victims in all this. And so that tends, in my opinion, to cause them to bias their coverage against Israel.
Well, I know that you have a bone to pick with the LA Times and the New York Times and their respective editorial boards based upon the fact that they've been pretty adamant against Israel, and I know you disagree with them. What are some quotes that you have from them and your disputes therein?
Sure. From the New York Times last week, quote, "There can be no excuse for the way Israel completely mishandled the situation." And from the LA Times, quote, "Was this the goal to bring 10,000 tons of aid to needy Gazans, or was it to provoke Israel into just a sort of violent response which left at least 9 civilian passengers dead?" I almost feel a little bad for the LA Times to even quote them here, because I think their quote there especially makes them look pretty foolish. I mean, to any halfway intelligent person paying attention to geopolitical politics, they know that this aid ship was just a hate boat and not a love boat, that was sent there to provoke Israel to, have to come to a very difficult decision whether to let it in and show weakness or to stop it and probably start a situation which led to violence and to some people dying.
And to the New York Times comment that there can be no excuse, do you believe that such a comment, it's a very strong one coming from the editorial division, and
Right.
The media has always made a concerted effort in saying that the editorial board is separate from the news media. Do you believe that there is some middle ground where the editorial board's position reflects the journalists on the ground or vice versa?
Well, this is one comment I was going to make is, by and large, this Gaza flotilla incident the coverage has been significantly more fair, I think, than the Dubai assassination that you might remember earlier this year, where people, or at least the press, seem to focus much more on how shocked they were that Mossad would use, fake passports to, try to assassinate one of Hamas's leading figures. So I think this Gaza flotilla incident, the coverage has been much more fair, and that's probably to Israel's credit for getting video out there to the public to show that, they were attacked by members on the ship. They were acting in self-defense. Um, so I would say, by and large, the coverage has been more fair. Your mainstream papers like the Washington Post, New York Times, you're probably not going to see information like this was a humanitarian group, quote unquote, which was a charity coming out of Turkey. But that charity, you're not going to find out unless you go to a conservative page, probably like the Journal or the Post, that this charity had ties to Hamas and Al Qaeda, and probably is a front organization for some kind of fundraising for those groups. And so you're not going to find that out
And
unless you
speaking
do
of
it.
visuals, Ryan, I know the third point that you wanted to address was coverage that recently occurred in the New York Post and also with Fox News, which took a Reuters photo that was, I guess, used by the news agency,
Correct.
showing the onboard incident as part of this flotilla. And talk us through this, Ryan, as we have it on the screen for our viewers.
Okay, great. So it's my understanding that this picture was submitted from one of the obviously people who was on board the ship. It was submitted to Reuters, and um, their editorial board at Reuters is pretty vague on the reason why they did it, but they conveniently cropped out portions of the image which would show that the people on board, and at one of the people had a knife, that there was blood on the floor, presumably from the injured Israeli armed forces member that's lying on the ground. Um, and then the other picture too, I think there was an image cropped out of a knife from another person. So Reuters is kind of ducking behind the issue and saying it was inadvertent, but obviously cropping out those things definitely makes them look bad.
Now, do you believe this to be a form of censorship or a form of bias or a form of framing the story to their liking? Um, what conclusion do you reach and why they would
Well,
do such
my,
a
my
thing?
conclusion is I don't think it's a conspiracy. I do think that journalists tend to make editorial decisions that kind of fits the narrative. And the narrative usually is that Israel's the aggressor, the Palestinians are the ones that are victims. And so if they get an image or if they're editing a story, they're more inclined to make it fit into the narrative that
So
they're
it's the
accustomed to.
overall narrative that concerns you.
Yeah, I don't see a conspiracy behind any of this stuff. I think it's just, again, groupthink and always going back to the narrative that they're taught in their journalism classes or at their editorial board meetings.
Very interesting. Well, fighting the groupthink, everyone. Ryan Williams coming to us from Oregon as part of the Press Police. Ryan, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.